Alright, let me remind you how to add and subtract integers. Let's look at this first one. 7 minus a negative 4. One way to think about this subtraction, or the result of this subtraction, is a directed distance from this number to this number. In other words, how far is it from negative 4 to 7? Well, on a number line you can see that real clearly. Let's look at a number line here. Here's negative 4 and here's 7. We got to think of this subtraction here as a distance, and it's from that negative 4 to 7. In other words, how far is it from negative 4 to 7? Well, you could actually count the numbers in between. That's going to be 11. And if we're thinking about the distance from negative 4 to 7, that would actually be a positive 11. So from this number all the way to that number is actually 11 units, and going in that direction is 11. One way you may remember subtraction is to think of this as the same as adding the opposite. In other words, we can think of that subtraction as adding the opposite of that negative 4 or 4, and that's where we get our 11 from. Let's do another one. 3 minus 5. Again, subtraction could be thought of as a directed distance from that number to that number. So one question is, how far is it from 5 to 3? Let's look at a number line. How far is it from 5 to 3? Well, we know that's 2 units, and since we're talking about from 5 to 3, that's a negative direction, so we know the answer here is negative 2. Another way to think of it as this subtraction as adding the opposite, so we can think of 3 adding the opposite of a positive 5, which is a negative 5, and hopefully you remember that gives a negative 2 result. Let's do a couple more. Negative 6 minus a negative 2. So this will give us a distance from negative 2 to negative 6. How far is that? Here's a number line. From negative 2 to negative 6, how far is that? From that number to that number in that direction. That's actually 4 units in the negative direction. So the answer here is negative 4. If we go to our old or previous method, we can think of this as negative 6 plus the opposite of that negative 2, which is 2. And hopefully you can see that that will yield a negative 4. One more here. Negative 8 minus a 1. So using the number line method, we can think of this as how far is it from this positive 1 to that negative 8 on a number line. I got to put a positive 1 there. So from positive 1 all the way down to negative 8, how far is that? Well, you can count, and you'll see that that is actually 9 units in that negative direction. So the answer here is negative 9. Let's do it another way though. Let's think of that subtraction as adding the opposite. So here we have negative 8 adding the opposite of a positive 1, which is a negative 1, and hopefully you see that will yield a negative